Welcome to WW2 Heroic Tales, where true stories of courage, sacrifice, and extraordinary heroism come alive from the darkest days of World War II. Join us as we uncover the untold moments that shaped history. In the vast, emerald expanse of the South Pacific, a new kind of war was being fought. A war not of thunderous naval guns or massed infantry charges, but of whispers in the jungle, of faint radio signals cutting through the oppressive humidity. This was the secret domain of the Coastwatchers. In early 1942, the Empire of Japan was a seemingly unstoppable tide, washing over Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. For the Allies, particularly Australia, the situation was dire. The Japanese war machine was moving south, threatening to sever the vital supply lines from the United States. To counter this, a unique and clandestine intelligence network was already in place, a string of lonely sentinels scattered across hundreds of remote islands. These men were an eclectic mix: Australian naval intelligence officers, colonial administrators, planters, and missionaries. But their most vital asset was their partnership with the local Solomon Islanders and Papuans, whose knowledge of the labyrinthine jungles and coastlines was unparalleled. They were the eyes and ears of the Allies, hidden deep within enemy-held territory. Their job was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution: watch the sea and sky and report every enemy movement. They were a human tripwire, stretched invisibly across the path of the Japanese advance. The stakes could not be higher. Discovery meant certain death, often after brutal interrogation. Yet they remained at their posts, knowing that a single, timely message could alter the course of the war. The architect of this remarkable organization was Commander Eric Felt of the Royal Australian Navy. Felt, a man who understood both the Pacific Islands and the nature of naval warfare, envisioned a network that could provide what fleets and armies desperately needed: advance warning. He codenamed the Operation Ferdinand, after the children's story character Ferdinand the Bull, who preferred to sit quietly and observe rather than fight. The name was apt. The Coastwatchers were not commandos. They were observers, their primary weapon a cumbersome piece of equipment known as the AWA teleradio 3 billion. This radio set was a marvel and a burden. Weighing over 30 kilograms, it had to be powered by heavy lead-acid batteries, which in turn were charged by a gasoline generator. Every component had to be painstakingly carried through dense jungle, up steep ridges, and across crocodile-infested rivers. The constant hum of the generator was a beacon for Japanese patrols, forcing the operators to post sentries and muffle the sound as best they could. Communication was a tense, methodical process. Messages were encoded using a laborious Playfair cipher, a system of substituting letter pairs from a 5x5 grid, before being tapped out in Morse code. Each transmission was a calculated risk, a brief electronic signature that enemy direction finders could potentially trace. Felt's instructions to his men were brutally honest. He told them their chances of survival were low, and that they should not expect rescue if compromised. Their role, he explained, was to send the warning. What happened after was secondary. This stark reality forged a unique breed of soldier, men defined by patience, resilience, and an extraordinary capacity for enduring isolation in the service of a cause larger than themselves. In the summer of 1942, the focus of the entire Pacific War converged on a single, malaria-ridden island few had ever heard of, Guadalcanal, in the Solomon Islands chain. Japanese naval construction battalions had landed and were working feverishly to carve an airfield from the Kunai grass plains near Lunga Point. An operational airbase here would be a dagger pointed at the heart of the Allied supply route to Australia. It would allow long-range Japanese bombers to dominate the sea lanes, effectively isolating the continent and securing Japan's southern flank. The Allies had to act, and fast. The intelligence that confirmed the airfield's construction came directly from the Coastwatchers already on the island. Men like Martin Clemens, a British district officer turned Allied spy, were hidden in the jungle-clad mountains overlooking the plains. With his dedicated team of indigenous scouts, Clemens monitored the Japanese progress, counting ships, estimating troop numbers, and reporting on the airfield's development. His radio signals, faint and crackling, were a lifeline of truth from a blacked-out island. He painted a grim picture of a rapidly developing strategic threat that could not be ignored. Based on these and other intelligence reports, Allied command made a momentous decision. They would launch the first major American offensive of the war, an amphibious assault to seize the island and its critical airfield before it could become operational. The operation was codenamed Watchtower. On August 7, 1942, the 1st Marine Division stormed the beaches of Guadalcanal, catching the Japanese garrison by surprise. But as the Marines pushed inland, the Coastwatchers like Clemens did not evacuate. Their war was just beginning. They were now operating deep behind enemy lines, surrounded by thousands of furious Japanese troops who would hunt them relentlessly. As the American invasion fleet lay anchored off Guadalcanal, its task of landing troops and supplies was perilous. The Japanese, stung by the surprise attack, were quick to retaliate. From their massive airbase at Rabaul, hundreds of miles to the north, they launched wave after wave of bombers and fighters to smash the American ships and the newly captured airfield. It was here that the Coastwatcher network demonstrated its profound, war-altering value. On the island of Bougainville, far to the north of Guadalcanal, Coastwatcher Jack Reed, a former plantation manager, was perched at his observation post. Through his binoculars, he saw them coming. A vast formation of Japanese Mitsubishi G4 million Betty bombers droning southwards. He immediately went to his radio. With practiced efficiency, he encrypted and transmitted a terse, now legendary message to his headquarters. It stated simply, 24 bombers headed yours. That message, relayed through the network, reached the American fleet and the Marines on Guadalcanal a full 2 hours before the Japanese aircraft arrived. 2 hours. In aerial warfare, that is an eternity. It was enough time for the supply ships to weigh anchor and begin evasive maneuvers. It was enough time for the fleet's anti-aircraft gunners to prepare. Most critically, It was enough time for the precious few F-4F Wildcat fighters of the Cactus Air Force, operating from the captured and hastily renamed Henderson Field, to scramble into the sky and climb to an advantageous altitude to meet the attackers. Without that warning, the Japanese bombers would have arrived over a surprised and vulnerable fleet, potentially inflicting catastrophic losses and dooming the entire Guadalcanal campaign from its very first day. Jack Reed and others like him had just become the most important eyes in the entire Pacific. The daily routine for the Marines and pilots on Guadalcanal became a life-or-death rhythm dictated by the crackle of the radio. The call would come in from the command post, a direct relay from a coastwatcher. Condition red. This meant Japanese aircraft were inbound. For the pilots of the Cactus Air Force, a motley collection of Marine, Navy, and Army Air Forces pilots, this was the signal to sprint to their rugged Grumman F-4F Wildcats. The planes, constantly patched up and refueled, would roar to life on the bumpy, shell-pocked runway of Henderson Field. The advance warning was their only real advantage against the superior Japanese, a 6,000,000 fighter. The Wildcat was slower and less maneuverable, but it was tough and well-armed. The Coastwatchers' intelligence allowed the American pilots to trade maneuverability for altitude, climbing high above the incoming Japanese formations to dive on them from out of the sun. The Japanese pilots grew to fear these ambushes. They had no idea how the Americans always seemed to know they were coming. They called Guadalcanal Death Island, a place where their veteran pilots were being bled white by a seemingly prescient enemy. This protection extended beyond the airfield. The warnings allowed ground crews to take cover, saving the lives of the mechanics who were essential to keeping the battered aircraft flying. The supply dumps and command posts could be protected. The entire American foothold on the island was shielded by these unseen guardians in the jungle. The Coastwatchers network was a force multiplier of incredible efficiency. A handful of men with radios were effectively protecting an entire division and its vital air support, preventing Henderson Field from being pounded into uselessness, and allowing the Cactus Air Force to survive and fight day after day. Among the many heroes of the Coastwatcher network, one man's story stands as a testament to almost superhuman endurance and loyalty. Sergeant Major Sir Jacob Vouza, a retired member of the Solomon Islands Protectorate Armed Constabulary. Vouza was fiercely loyal to the Allies and volunteered his services to Martin Clemens and the U.S. Marines. His deep knowledge of the island's terrain and its people made him an invaluable scout. While on a reconnaissance mission to locate Japanese positions, Vouza was captured by a patrol from Colonel Keanu Ikeki's elite regiment, which was preparing for a major assault on the Marine lines at Henderson Field. They demanded information about the American positions. Vouza refused to speak. For hours he was brutally tortured. He was bound to a tree and interrogated. When he still refused to betray the Marines, his captors bayoneted him repeatedly in his chest, arms, stomach, and face, and left him for dead. Miraculously, Vouza survived. Summoning a reserve of strength that defies belief, he gnawed through the ropes binding him, and despite his horrific wounds, began to crawl and stumble his way back through miles of dense, hostile jungle. Bleeding profusely, he eventually reached the American lines. Before collapsing, he delivered his critical intelligence. A powerful Japanese force was about to launch a major attack. He even provided details about their numbers and location. His warning gave the Marines under Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Pollock just enough time to reinforce their positions along Alligator Creek, also known as the Ilu River. The resulting Battle of the Tenaru was a decisive American victory. The Ikiki Regiment was annihilated, and a catastrophic breakthrough was averted. Jacob Vouza's incredible act of courage and sacrifice had saved hundreds, perhaps thousands, of American lives, and secured a vital flank at a critical moment in the campaign. While Australian and British officers like Martin Clemens and Jack Reed were the operational leaders, the Coastwatcher network could not have existed for a single day without the unwavering support of the indigenous people of the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. They were the true backbone of the entire intelligence operation. These local scouts, porters, and messengers formed a loyal and resilient force that the Japanese could never fully comprehend or defeat. Their motives were complex, ranging from loyalty to the pre-war colonial administration to a deep-seated desire to expel the often brutal Japanese occupiers from their ancestral lands. They guided the Coastwatchers through treacherous terrain they had known since birth, finding secret paths and hidden observation posts. They acted as a human supply chain, carrying the heavy radios, batteries, and food over mountains and through swamps, often risking their own starvation. Their families in the villages provided food and shelter at immense personal risk, knowing that being caught aiding the Allies would result in the destruction of their homes and the execution of their entire community. They were the forward scouts, slipping silently through the jungle to observe Japanese patrols, count troop numbers, and identify artillery positions with a stealth no foreigner could ever hope to match. Men like Sergeant Major Vouza were not the exception. They were emblematic of the courage displayed by thousands. They rescued downed Allied airmen, cared for them in secret, and guided them back to safety. For their service, they received little in the way of pay or official recognition at the time, yet their contribution was nothing short of decisive. Without their courage, their local knowledge, and their sacrifice, the jungle would have consumed the isolated radio operators, and the vital flow of intelligence would have been silenced. Beyond their primary role as intelligence gatherers, the Coastwatchers also ran one of the most successful rescue operations of the entire war. The skies over the Solomon Islands, particularly the channel between the islands known as the Slot, became a brutal killing ground for aircraft. Dogfights were a daily occurrence, and many Allied pilots found themselves parachuting from their stricken planes into the vast, green jungle or the shark-infested waters below. For a downed airman, survival often depended entirely on being found by the Coastwatcher network. The system was remarkably effective. A Coastwatcher would spot a parachute and immediately dispatch local islanders to the location. These expert trackers would navigate the unforgiving terrain to find the often injured and disoriented pilot. They would carry him back to a hidden camp, where he would be given medical attention, food, and shelter. The Coast Watcher would then radio headquarters to arrange a rescue. These extractions were complex and dangerous, often involving U.S. Navy submarines surfacing at night off a remote beach, or PBY Catalina flying boats making daring open-sea landings. The numbers speak for themselves. Throughout the war, the Coast Watchers were directly responsible for saving the lives of 321 Allied airmen. But their life-saving efforts didn't stop there. They also rescued 280 sailors from sunken ships, 190 missionaries and civilians who had been trapped by the Japanese advance, and hundreds of local islanders fleeing Japanese persecution. This incredible record of rescue had a profound impact on Allied morale. Pilots flying into combat over the Solomons knew that if the worst happened, there was a dedicated network on the ground looking for them. It was a sliver of hope in a brutal theater of war, a promise that they would not be abandoned, all thanks to the lonely men listening by their radios in the jungle. As the brutal, grinding battle for Guadalcanal reached its climax in late 1942, the intelligence provided by the Coast Watchers became more critical than ever. The Japanese, desperate to retake Henderson Field, began sending nightly naval reinforcement and supply runs down the slot. This fleet of cruisers and destroyers, dubbed the Tokyo Express by the Americans, was the lifeline for the Japanese forces on the island. The Coast Watchers, stationed on islands all along the slot, became the official announcers for this deadly procession. As the Japanese warships steamed south, reports would flood into Allied command. One heavy cruiser, 5 destroyers, heading south at 25 knots. This real-time tracking allowed the U.S. Navy to plan ambushes and commit its own limited naval forces at the most opportune moments. It led to a series of savage, point-blank naval engagements in the dark waters of what became known as Iron Bottom Sound, so named for the dozens of ships sunk there from both sides. Battles like the naval Battle of Guadalcanal in November 1942 were turning points, where the U.S. Navy, armed with crucial intelligence, was able to inflict devastating losses on the Imperial Japanese Navy and ultimately sever the Tokyo Express. The man in overall command of the South Pacific area, Admiral William F. Bull Halsey, was under no illusions about the source of his tactical advantage. He saw firsthand how the reports from a few men in the jungle were translating into victories at sea. After the campaign was finally won in February 1943, Halsey made a statement that would become the definitive epitaph for the network's contribution. He declared, "The Coast Watchers saved Guadalcanal, and Guadalcanal saved the South Pacific." It was not hyperbole. By providing the intelligence that enabled the defense of Henderson Field and the defeat of the Tokyo Express, this small, clandestine group had directly contributed to halting the Japanese advance, securing the lifeline to Australia, and setting the stage for the Allied victory in the Pacific. The incredible success of the Coast Watchers came at a terrible price. Of the approximately 400 men who served, 36 were killed in action or executed after capture. The Japanese military, infuriated and mystified by the Allies' seemingly clairvoyant intelligence, launched dedicated patrols to hunt them down. For a coast watcher, the greatest fear was the sound of dogs barking or the sudden appearance of a Japanese patrol emerging from the jungle. Capture was a death sentence. The Japanese, seeking information on the network's codes and locations, subjected captured operators to horrific torture before their inevitable execution. Beyond the threat of the enemy, the environment itself was a relentless foe. Malaria, dysentery, dengue fever, and tropical ulcers were constant companions. Malnutrition was rampant, as resupply was sporadic at best. The psychological toll of the profound isolation, coupled with the constant, nerve-shredding tension of being hunted, was immense. These men lived for months, sometimes years, on a razor's edge, their only contact with the outside world being the disembodied voice on the radio. They were ghosts in their own war, invisible but essential. Their story is one of quiet, sustained courage, far from the dramatic charges and celebrated battles. It was a war of endurance, of listening to the drone of an unseen aircraft and tapping out a coded message, knowing that it might be your last. They were a small band of individuals who, through their lonely vigil, held the fate of thousands in their hands. Their sacrifice was a crucial and decisive factor in the Allied victory, a debt acknowledged by the highest echelons of command, but a story largely lost in the shadow of the larger conflict. Thank you for joining WW2 Heroic Tales. Through the stories of brave souls from World War II, we honor their memory and keep their legacy alive for history and generations to come.